Welcome back to part 2 of our double podcast episode about the 1972 building workers' strike. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I recommend you go back and listen to that first.
Up and down the nation he gave the workers strength and courage. Up and down the nation he taught us to prevail. He fought for safer building sites, he argued for £1 an hour. He was so successful that they put him in the jail.
In part 1, we heard about how the strike started and developed. After 12 weeks, the strike was called off when union leaders came to an agreement with employers. The main demands were not met, and some rank-and-file activists considered it a sellout. However, despite this, it was still the biggest ever pay increase in the industry and considered a massive victory for the workers.
They came out and told us what they'd achieved. It wasn't the claim, but it was like a huge benefit and victory for us. When that was announced, the roar that went up, there was several thousand building workers there. That is a real... that was incredible. I was there demanding no calling off of the strike and for the full claim, yeah? But bearing in mind, a lot of employers individually had already conceded on the main claim. You know, that was the success of the strike. Even before it was called off individually, a lot of companies actually had conceded. So it was a victory. It achieved £6 increase a week. Can you imagine that? At that time, £6 for the first year, followed by the second year, another £6. Percentage terms is like 50% pay rise, isn't it? Who's ever got a 50% pay rise that you know of? Especially not now. That was incredible. And what happened, the most organised jobs, when the leadership called off the strike, they even refused a vote to say whether they should call out off the strike. Yeah. Later on, the General Secretary got a knight, would you believe, Sir George Smith. What happened is that when the strike was called off, workers went back to work, a lot of jobs then threatened to go on strike again to add the percentage increase onto their bonus rates. It's the basic pay and you get productivity bonus rates for your output, the amount of work you achieve. And I did that on my job in William Willits and Mile End. We demanded that and we got it. They caved in straight away because they knew we'd go out and strike. So we trebled, if you like, our money. It was a huge success. Huge. It's massive. Something to be celebrated. So proud of it.
After being given a bloody nose by building workers, construction employers began organising the backlash.
The backlash was inevitable, and we knew it was inevitable, but the leadership never prepared for the backlash. The Economic League was revitalised hugely. A conspiracy took place by the employers, by leading person Lord McAlpine, who was the treasurer of the Tory party at the time. It was state conspiracy, and it was delivered by a huge witch hunt of alleged violence throughout the country, in particular in Shrewsbury, an isolated place which there was picketing, and witch hunted on the television, radio, the newspapers, and the union leadership caved in. First of all, they said they would give the backing to those that were being threatened with court action, and court action did take place against them under conspiracy laws. It's an old law going back to the 18th century. They were charged under those laws, medieval laws. They withdrew the financial and legal backing from the 24 that were charged over violence in the fray and under conspiring to get workers to stop work.
The Economic League was an anti-worker, anti-subversion organisation set up in 1919 and led by establishment figures in the aristocracy, the military, the BBC, newspapers, and so on. One of its main activities was maintaining blacklists of left-wingers and union activists. As mentioned in Part 1, Shrewsbury was where events took place which supposedly implicated 24 striking building workers in picket line violence. This despite being followed all day by around 80 police, with no arrests or reports of wrongdoing on the day. Months later, the workers were charged with a litany of crimes. Des Warren faced 28 charges and Ricky 21. But by the time of the trial, these had been whittled down to just 3: conspiracy to intimidate, affray, and unlawful assembly. The 24 workers were split into 3 different trials. Ricky was a defendant in the first one.
We had a very, very successful strike. Very, very successful strike. So much so that it frightened the bosses, the Wimpeys and the Bovises and all them. It frightened them to death. And hence they brought these ridiculous charges against me and 23 other building workers. 6 of us ended up in court at Shrewsbury, listening to a trial that lasted 55 days. 55 days. I was in the witness box for 3 days, just giving evidence. And then, as I say, in today's money, it cost around about £20+ million. And it was probably the most heavily guarded security-wise trial that there's ever been in this country, sort of heavier than the protection that was there for the Crays, the Tibbses and all them. The police present, at one time they reckon there was like 700 police there. I mean, there's photographs of all this. I mean, I'm not just saying this. There's photographs of this, of police on motorbikes hiding. The actual courtroom was surrounded by police shoulder to shoulder, right round the courthouse. Outside the courthouse in Shrewsbury, there's a monument to someone. I'm not sure who the monument's to. There was even a policeman on top of the monument with a video camera, videoing what was going on. That's the way it was. And as I say, we had 6 of us in the dock. Unbeknownst to us at the time, one of them in the dock with us was a police informer who had a string of convictions as long as his arm. His name was John Carpenter, who, we found out later, up to the day the strike was called, wasn't even in the building game. But somehow we managed to get a card, get a job for the local council. Even though his name was Carpenter, he got a name as a joiner for the local council. But it turned out actually that it wasn't even his real name. He'd actually changed his name by deed, Paul. But that's another story. But the judge at the end of the trial, before he sentenced us, he praised this John Carpenter. He said, "You seem to be the most intelligent of all these people." And then he read his antecedents out, which took about half an hour to read out, the times he'd spent in jail and the sort of offences he'd committed. But we were so naive, we didn't realise at the time it was a political trial. But what I should mention is, because people forget this, when the trial was before it started, and we were in the holding cell, the 6 of us were there, and the barristers come down, John Platts Mills and David Turner Samuels. And he said now look, he said that the prosecution have offered you a deal. You can either plead guilty now, you will be fined 50 quid. The union have agreed to pay the £50 fine, and you can all be home for 12 o'clock noon. And the other 4 lads took the deal. And then it came to me, and I said, "No, I'm not taking the deal. I said, I've done nothing wrong." I said, I was the delegated steward on the job, and I'd done what I had to do. And Desi Warren said, "Don't even bother bloody asking me." He said, "You're not on." Anyway, the other 4 then said, "Well, if you 2 are pleading not guilty, we'll go along with you." And that's how the trial took place. But what is so important about that is people forget that when we were getting sentenced, as I say, it was 8-4, then 2 of them changed their mind after staying out overnight and deliberating. When he sentenced the 4 lads in front of me, and it came to me, and the jury was still only 10-2, when they sentenced me to 2 years on each of the 3 charges, 2 of the jurymen started fighting, physically fighting in the jury box, and run out of the jury box and went back into the jury room. And the judge had to send for them to come back out because Desi hadn't been sentenced. So as I say, I got 3 2s, and poor old Desi, he got 3 3s. That was the thing. So right away, we knew it was going to be a little bit awkward.
At the end of a 13-week trial, Des Warren and Ricky were convicted of all 3 charges and jailed for 3 years and 2 years respectively, while others were given shorter sentences. The defendants later heard that members of the jury had been misled.
They were told in the jury box that we were only going to get fined 50 quid. They were told the same as we were told on the morning the trial started, 55 days previous. The court usher said to them, I don't know what all the fuss is about. You've been away all night. What's all the fuss about? If they get found guilty, they're only getting fined 50 quid and the union are going to pay it. And two of them changed their bloody mind. But as I say, we were so naive, we didn't know that it was a political thing.
Indeed, soon after the strike ended, Tory Home Secretary Robert Carr made a statement about, quote, disturbing evidence of intimidation, end quote, that supposedly took place during the strike. Carr was likely referencing a dossier produced by the National Federation of Building Trade Employers documenting alleged violence by striking workers. However, as the Financial Times reported, the dossier was flawed as it, quote, suggests the existence of a sinister plot without being able to substantiate the allegations. Many of the incidents that have been listed seem to be little more than the ordinary spontaneous angry behaviour that might be expected on a building site at any time. The publication reads more like a politically motivated pamphlet than a serious study, end quote. The political nature of the trial as an attack not only on building workers, but the wider trade union movement would become clearer as time went on.
But as I say, there was 80 policemen with us, kid, on the day, 80 policemen. No one was arrested. No one was cautioned. No one had their name and address taken or had to make a statement. No one, nothing. That was it. And then this 4 months later or whenever it was, they turned up at court. And you should have seen the size of these policemen sitting in the dock giving evidence, almost in tears. They were like bloody rugby players. They were huge. And they all said the same thing. We were frightened. We were terrified. We didn't know what was going on. And it was embarrassing for them. The police have had to admit that they made all new statements and destroyed all the original statements. Not only did they do that once, they done it twice. They got the originals, made new ones, then destroyed the new ones he'd made and got these other ones, and everyone knew about it.
The police also falsified witness statements. In one trial, a labourer called John Seberg explained that part of his so-called statement had been added by police and that he'd returned to the station the next day to get it retracted. Despite this, the judge nonetheless ruled that the statement was still admissible as evidence. Meanwhile, back at Ricky's trial, the political nature of the trial could also be seen in the choice and behaviour of the judge.
He wasn't a criminal barrister, the judge. He was an ecclesiastical barrister who was made up to take the trial. His name was Mays. He said to the jury, well, look, go to this hotel and carry on deliberating, which is ludicrous. Apparently that's against the rules. They're only supposed to discuss the case in the jury room. And so because at that time it was 8-4, the jury was divided 8-4. And so when they came back the next morning, within 10 minutes, two of them had changed their mind. We got convicted on a 10-2 majority. We had a great team of barristers, but obviously when the odds are stacked against you, there's not a lot they could do. And the judge, he was hopeless. Sometimes he'd have to stop the trial while our barristers would have to explain to him what was going on. Because as I say, he wasn't a criminal barrister. He was an ecclesiastical lawyer. And apparently, I don't know, but I heard it said, I don't know. Apparently, he had a reputation for being anti-Semitic as well, this guy. You know, I don't know whether he was a maverick or what. He was a sort of a buffoon of a man. What he used to do, and particularly when we were giving our speeches and having he used to turn his chair around so we could only see the back of him. We could only see the back of him from the dock. He'd turn his chair around and wouldn't face us. And sometimes when we were saying things he didn't agree with, he would take his wig off and throw it on the table. He was a bit of a clown, really, but, he had a job to do for them, and he'd done it, didn't he, you know?
At the end of the 3 Shrewsbury trials, out of the 24 defendants, 22 were convicted. After almost 50 years of campaigning, those convictions were finally quashed in 2021. In the meantime, however, they continued their struggle as political prisoners.
What me and Desi decided to do, because we were going to a closed prison, the other 4 went to, I think some got suspended, and 2 of them got a couple of months in an open nick. And me and Desi said, well, look, this is the way we're going to do it. We're not going to wear clothes. We're not going to work. We're not going to soldier, and it's going to be difficult. But anyway, that's what we done. We never ever done a day's work. We wouldn't work. We spent most of the time in solitary confinement. We went on hunger strike for 31 days. And I think we'd been in about 14 or 15 months. So I was in the hospital wing because we'd been on hunger strike for 30 odd days. Well, I'd never been in jail. Obviously, they put me in this cell, and I got up in the middle of the night to go for a wee. I went to put my foot on the floor, and I should have known something was up because the bed had like plastic bottles, and the top was cut off. And the legs of the bed were in these plastic bottles, and there was water in the plastic. And I didn't have a clue. I didn't. When I went to put my foot on the floor just disappeared. It was cockroaches. Full. I mean, there wasn't an inch. And I've got a phobia of cockroaches now, thanks to it. It was dreadful. I kicked up murder the next day, was lashing things at the wall and windows. And they moved me onto a landing. And then that was before we went back into solitary. That's the sort of thing that they were doing. But, we'll see how tough this fella is and all like that. Well, you have to put up with it. But as I said, they put us in the workshop. They put us in the workshop making these reels with, what do they call little tape recorders are, and it was funny. Desi went up to the fella, he said, "What's the rate?" The fella said, "What do you mean?" He said, What's the rate of pay? What's the rate of pay? We were back in the cells in about 5 minutes. They put us in an open prison then, and to try and quieten us down. And then Desi found out that the screws had a sideline. They were making bicycles and selling them on the side. And as soon as we exposed that, we were back inside. We were back in a closed nick again, But as I say, they used to move us all the time. I remember one fellow, his name was Mr. Smith. And I just forget what prison it was, because as I say, we were in that many. He used to move us and move us and move it. And he come in, it was midnight or something, and he opened the cell door and put the light on. And I'll never forget, I looked at him, he had a white sort of trench mac on, like a white military mac. But he had pyjamas on. He had his trousers on. But I could see his pyjama bottoms coming out. It was midnight, I could see his pyjama bottoms coming out of his trousers. And he said to me, "Tomlinson, you bastard," he said, "give me my prison pad." Oh, and I was moved then. Next morning they come and they said, "I put your stuff in your pillowcase off your pop." They used to put us in a car and take us somewhere. They never knew where they were taking us. And I remember Desi, because as I say, he had 5 kids, Desi. And I remember I think he was in Lincoln then. I don't think I went in Lincoln. He was in Lincoln, and his wife turned up with the kids, with the 5 kids. They let her into the visits and left his 5 kids outside. That's a criminal offence, that. They should have been locked up for that. Them kids could have run in the road. They left his kids outside. And they wonder why he took it so bad. He lost weight. He went as white as a bloody... Honest to God, he was snow white when he was lying on that mattress. I'll never forget it. I still get worked up when I think about it.
As Ricky mentions, Des Warren suffered a lot in prison. During a sentence of just under 3 years, he spent 6 consecutive months in solitary confinement and was subject to frequent harassment from prison officials. While in prison, Warren was prescribed a tranquilizer drug in liquid form that was so strong it was known as the liquid cosh. Warren described going into a zombie-like state while he was on it, and when he stopped taking it, he began to notice problems similar to Parkinson's disease. He died from his illness in 2004, aged 66, having never worked in construction again. He received just £3,000 compensation for his mistreatment. During their time in prison, aside from miners' leader Arthur Scargill, many union leaders, including those of their own union, UCAT, abandoned the Shrewsbury pickets. Meanwhile, the newly elected Labour government ignored demands from its own conference to release the pickets, describing them as lawbreakers. Even the Communist Party, which Des Warren was a member of at the time, obstructed the creation of a mass campaign for his and Ricky's release, with the leadership falsely telling members that Warren didn't want action as he was worried about repercussions in prison. In contrast to the wave of wildcat strikes which had defeated the Industrial Relations Act and secured the release of 5 imprisoned dock workers only a few years before, there were multiple instances of Communist Party shop stewards blocking action. One worker at the British Aircraft Corporation factory recalls a Communist Party union convener reading a statement from UCAT disowning the Shrewsbury prisoners and refusing to let the factory union banner be taken on a march in solidarity with them. In his memoir, Warren puts this down to the party's policy of, quote, limiting mass action in order to preserve relations with the trade union bureaucracy, end quote. Instead, they called for endless lobbying of the Trades Union Congress to then lobby Parliament, who ultimately did nothing. When Ricky got out of prison, he started going around the country speaking about the Shrewsbury case. In 1975, he tried to speak at the TUC conference, but was refused by Mary Patterson, who was president and chairperson at the time. Patterson has since gone on to receive a damehood.
Because I was in the balcony and I asked for 5 minutes to get on the stage and speak about Desi, and everyone was shouting, let him speak, let him speak. But the electricians union, a fella called Brakel or something like that, he was shouting, no, they were political thugs, and it was murder. And Marie Patterson said to me, if you don't sit down, I'll call the police. I'm screaming, well, call the police. And I think if the bouncers come, you know, they lost me out of the conference. But we had great support off the likes of Scargill and a few other people in the trade union movement. But the Labour Party let us down dreadful. Well, the trade union movement in a way let us down dreadfully, but when it's a political thing, lads, you know, there's not a lot you could do.
As well as conspiring with the state to crack down on trade unionists, construction bosses also responded with a blacklist, keeping a list of known union activists and refusing to employ them.
After the strike, I couldn't get any work. I was walking the streets. I did get a job, a Lang's job, at Tottenham Court Road. I was recognised by the foreman on the same day I started from a previous job as a union activist and immediately sacked. I could see him looking up at me from below because I was about 2 or 3 stories high on a scaffold. He recognised me. I was immediately sacked there and then. I refused to go because I've got so many refusals based on being blacklisted. I sat in the canteen. Management then got 2 heavies onto me and lifted me out my seat, out the canteen, and chucked me off the site. That's exactly what happened. The workers see that happening that was in the canteen at the time and immediately threatened strike action. They thought it was horrendous for that to happen. And because of the threat of strike action, I got back on the job. And I lasted, it was a big job, huge job, YMCA Tottenham Court Road. Jobs lasted longer in those days, actually. Big jobs, that is. I was there for 1.5 years. And then when that job come to a finish, well, you're not selected to continue down to another one, are you? No, you're gone. And that's what happened to me. I couldn't get any more work, so I applied for a major refurbishment project in downtown Bermondsey. To my delight, I got a star. I was amazed. Within a month, I got elected as a steward. And within 9 months, I was elected as the union convener, full-time union convener for Southwark. And I remained there for 36 years.
Tony was one of the relatively lucky ones. Others never found work again in the industry. The full extent of the blacklist was only understood decades later, and again was the result of pressure from the rank and file.
What recently has revealed the extent of the Shrewsbury and the blacklisting was from the Blacklist Support Group, which was a group of building workers set up, started by them. What happened, the Government Data Protection Act was forced to raid the offices of a company that was set up called a Consulting Association, which came from the Economic League, a blacklisting organisation, because a manager on a big project blew the whistle that he was being requested to give the names of all new workers on the job so they could be checked out to see if they needed to be refused work, new starters, as we call them. And he blew the whistle. He fell out with his fellow management. And that evidence was used in an industrial tribunal case. And it then forced, because then it gets into the legal settings, yeah. it forced the Government Data Protection Act agency to raid the office, and it was revealed 3,500 building workers were on the blacklist. And many, because a lot of them were older workers, came from the 72 strike. This is why I'm making the connection between 72. A lot of them, if not most of them, are now dead, actually, because they're either older workers or they've died. And the conditions in the industry would have killed them off anyway. When the Blacklist Support Group was set up just a few years ago, after I mentioned about the Consulting Association offices, the blacklisting organisation, being forced to raid their offices, an organisation from below was set up by not the unions, by construction workers, called the Blacklist Support Group, led by Dave Smith. They took action. They blocked roads outside sites that wouldn't allow them to workers to be employed because they were blacklisted. They occupied the offices of the building companies. They did all sorts of things, right? They went to Park Lane in London outside the Grosvenor Hotel, laid bricks outside the entrance of it. When the building employers were celebrating themselves, they award themselves prizes every year. Who's the best employer? Ironically, they went there. They sat down in the road, and then they got a solicitor to take out a claim in the High Court under the Data Protection Act, right? And then that got extended, and this is when the unions got involved, into the Human Rights Act, yeah, and some other law, right? And 700 of UCAP members took claims, and over 1,000 in total of the other unions took claims as well. A lot of the other 3,500, they might have been dead. They might have been not in the industry. They didn't know, or not in the union because they'd come out of the industry. They didn't take any action. But out of all of that, there was workers received, and I received £35,000 compensation myself. Others received over £100,000.
Despite vicious attacks from both construction bosses and the state, the 1972 strike left a lasting legacy on the building industry.
I think people took building workers a lot more seriously after the strike because they knew, even though it was fragmented and it wasn't the most organised in the world, it became more organised. I think the bosses realised that they couldn't treat us like shit the way they had done for all them years. Health and safety was the main thing. That was really, really improved, even down to little things like wet weather gear and Wellingtons and stuff like that. You know, before there was none of that. If you went to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, you got soaked, you either stayed and worked in that wet gear, or you went home and lost your wages. That was it. The toilets, which are a little bit better now, you know, you get a couple of porta cabins and stuff like that, which is a lot better. They put scaffolding up now with kickboards on. Save lads climbing ladders, trying to put bloody window frames in off ladders. I've even seen windows being put in the old days, with someone standing in the buckets of a JCB, and they'd lift the bloody JCB up and they're trying to fix window frames in. What fellas done just to try and earn their wages was bloody ludicrous. It was absolutely ludicrous.
For anyone who doesn't know, a JCB is basically a mechanical digger. Anyway, even these improved safety conditions have only been the result of constant vigilance and campaigning by rank-and-file building workers.
In 1988, a construction safety campaign was set up. We were hearing stories of where workers were being killed on the job, and a change had taken place. Traditionally, if someone got killed in a job, the workers themselves would automatically stop work and go on home, or they'd be told to go home. Right? And a number of jobs, that was not happening. Can you imagine? The employers were insisting you carry on working, and there was no resistance taking place. They didn't walk off the job. And that was, to us, an outrage. And then the previous year's figures of the deaths was a 10-year high of construction deaths. There was as many deaths in building site accidents in the whole year than what there was on the Piper Alpha.
Piper Alpha was an oil platform located in the North Sea off the coast of Scotland. In 1988 it exploded, killing 165 workers as well as 2 rescue crew.
And it was in the newspapers, telly, for weeks on end, quite rightly so. Nothing said about construction deaths. No publicity, no whimper whatsoever. Instead of that, the employers encouraging workers to continue working. So that was an outrage. So we got together with some progressive politicians and we decided to set up the construction safety campaign. And we decided straight away we would not go to the leadership of the unions to ask them for support. Made that decision deliberately because we knew they would try to divert the campaign because that's what they've done before, right? First thing we did, we went to the Health and Safety Executive Head Office. That's the organisation for workplace safety. And they every year they did an annual press conference to announce the deaths in industry, the breakdown of the deaths, the amount of serious injuries and so on. We went there, put a picket outside and also went in, occupied it. We went inside and the cameras were rolling and the journalists were there. We said, speak to us because we're the ones who are affected by health and safety and it's outrageous that's going on. We asked them to ask the cameras to black out our faces, which they did. The following day, we were in the Telegraph, we were in a load of the papers, and we was on the news. We thought, that's it, we've had a result. Right? It made our campaign become aware by a lot of people. We then had a public meeting, which was a huge success. We put out a leaflet to nearly all of the union branches for them to support us and donate so we could get our publicity out and so on. Immediately, the largest union, UCAT, Albert Williams, the General Secretary, put a circle out to all the branches saying, have nothing to do with this campaign. Everything is done to make you safe and you've got nothing to worry about. That was the response of the union leadership to a 10-year high in construction deaths on site. That was their response to us, to send this to all the branches. Once they done that, our campaign took off. A lot of the branches started supporting us. In fact, we got support from 2 of the regional councils of the union virtually immediately. We had public meetings in the union offices when the union leadership were barring them from us having meetings there. And then the next thing we do, we go to coroner's courts to see if we could chat to the relatives of those who got killed on building sites. Some of them, as you can expect, withdrawn and nervous, but quite a few of them were quite open and supported everything we did. We told them what we were trying to do, change the law. At that time, not one building employer had been jailed for reckless action that killed workers. We changed that. We've changed that now. You've got corporal manslaughter. Yeah, fines have gone up hugely. And the amount of deaths have gone up from what was 157 that year to now in the 20s, 30s and 40s. One death too many, mind, but see how, so there's been a huge drop.
These experiences of the strike, the repression and the struggles which came afterwards contain important lessons for all workers.
The main lesson, any issue that you have, any issue to do with work, you have to be strong from below. It starts from there. The union itself cannot be strong unless there's organisation on the ground to make it strong. And be wary that union leadership is not the same as the workers in a union. They are not on our workplace. They're working in the union offices, surrounded by all of that. And there is a temptation, especially in times of the country going in a very nationalistic, right-wing agenda, attacking workers and getting away with it. The union, unless the fight takes place from below, will do nothing until you have a fight from below. And that's the case now. Hasn't changed. It's not changed. Happen from below, it won't happen. But the main lesson is this.
Up and down the nation he gave the workers strength and courage. Up and down the nation he taught us to prevail. He fought for safer building sites, he argued for £1 an hour. He was so successful that they put him in the jail.
That's it for our double episode on the 1972 building workers' strike. We also have a bonus episode in which Ricky speaks to us more about his time in prison, his struggles with union officials, and some of the great trade unionists he's befriended over the years. That's available now exclusively for our Patreon supporters. It's only because of support from you, our listeners, which allows us to make these podcasts. So if you appreciate our work, please do think about joining us at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. In return for your support, you get early access to content, as well as exclusive bonus content, discounted merch, books, and more. And if you can't spare the cash, that's absolutely no problem. Please just tell your friends and family about this podcast. And if you've got a Spotify account, Spotify now lets you review podcasts, so we'd really appreciate it if you could take a second to give us a 5-star review. If you want to learn more about the 1972 building workers' strike and the subsequent Shrewsbury trials, we recommend you pick up a copy of Des Warren's memoir, The Key to My Cell. Link to grab it from an independent bookshop in the show notes. You can also find some of Tony's works about struggles in the construction industry, and as always, we've got sources, links to more info, transcripts, further reading, and more on the webpage for this episode, all in the show notes. Thanks again to our Patreon supporters for making this podcast possible, and a special thanks to Stone Lawson. We'd also like to thank Dave Smith from the Blacklist Support Group for helping us get in touch with our guests for this podcast. The music used in these episodes is My Name is Desi Warren by Alan Parry. Links to stream and buy it in the show notes. This episode was edited by Louise Barry. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening.
Which one sold you down the river? Which one's fought your cause? The guard said, what's your number, boy? He said, my name is Desi Warren. The guard said, that's your name, you fool. Your number's what I need. And he said, my name is Desi Warren. You hear, my name is Desi Warren. The number, it belongs to you. I'm only saying my name. The bosses on the Tory party plotted to imprison Desi. Labour came to power, but still Desi was not free. So don't just point your fingers at the ones who framed him in the first place. Also at the scoundrels who clung on to the key. The guard said, what's your number, boy? He said, my name is Desi Warren. The guard said, that's your name, you fool. Your number's what I